Midnight Third Rail, a New York gay love story. The lights died between stations and the tunnel breathed back at us, and a voice on the radio, steady, unfamiliar, somehow already mine, said my name like it was a handle. Luis, do not take power if you can't see the third rail. Hold at the gap. I'm at Lenox with O2 and ice. I drive the late-night downtown 2 train, cab 6348, a little rolling apartment with a dead plant in the corner because I keep telling myself I'm the kind of person who can keep a plant alive. I'm 31, 3 years in the chair, Queens raised by a mother who ironed uniforms until they cracked, a father who taught me to keep one hand on something that won't move. On July nights, the tunnel air feels like a secret you're sworn to keep. Warm, damp, metallic, humming. And then sometimes everything stops humming, and you're just a man in a box with 100 heartbeats behind you. The blackout hit like a jaw. Not the big apocalypses from movies, more the mean little punch that breaks your focus. 1 second I had aspect green. The next, the signal heads were dead eyes and my console went to a soft glow that said, I can still tell stories, but I won't decide anything for you. The train coasted, honest as gravity, and I brought it to a smooth stop in the dark wedge between stations where we're trained not to be, not for long. I called control, no answer. I called again because habit makes you brave. The third try, a different voice cut in, a voice I'd never heard across this wire. This is Malik, Con Ed Emergency. We've got a feeder trip that took a bite out of your line. Do not try for a reset until we find the fault, hold, breathe. I'm staging at 125th. With portable power and ice packs in case your car AC croaks. There was an old man in car 3 who carries a small oxygen concentrator to keep his lungs honest. There was a kid asleep across 2 seats in car 5 whose mother had that tired, white-knuckle expression that means you'll forgive anything as long as you get to keep this child. There was me, doing the math of sweat by the minute. I walked back through the cars with my flashlight announcing what I could. We're safe. We're stopped. I'll update you every 5. We'll get you home. A woman asked if she could call her boyfriend, if the phones worked in the dark like we pretend they do in the light. We all lifted our devices like offerings. The bars were thin. The tunnel didn't care. The old man's concentrator beeped, that little electronic whine that pulls a thread through your sternum. I crouched and ran the checks I've learned from nurses who ride the midnight when their shifts go sideways. You okay? I asked. He tried to say yes with his mouth, but his eyes were honest. They said not yet. Luis, the radio again. Malik's voice softened like a hand under the back of your head. I've got a troubleshooter at 110th. We can walk a portable to your lead car if you can open at the catwalk. But please don't put anyone on the roadbed unless you can see the shoe. I need you stubborn. I'm already stubborn, I said. I cracked the end door, let the tunnel heat bite me, checked that the third rail was where it always is and not new and surprised underfoot. Con Ed's flashlight bobbed in the dark like a helpful star. In 5 minutes he was at my end car with a little silver suitcase that hummed like a patient cat. I'm Tash, he said. The voice is Malik. He's better looking. He set the suitcase by the old man and we heard the concentrator breathe like a room had exhaled. But the part that still knots my throat didn't happen until after we got moving again. Control came back like a friend who'd lost their keys. Frantic, apologizing, finally useful. Third rail confirmed cold between 110th and 116th, but we've got a green pocket south of you. We can back you to the platform at 125th on restrictive, if you keep it walking pace. I nudged us backwards the way you move a sleeping child. The platform candles, phones lifted, lighters like it was 1999, made a little galaxy. The doors opened on a breath of evening air that believed in electricity differently than the tunnel did. Malik was there in a yellow vest over a Mets tee, forearms sheened with the kind of sweat that says I've been running stairwells. He had a crate of water bottles and a coil of extension cord slung from his shoulder like a bandolier. He was taller than his voice, which had made me think of careful. His eyes were the kind of brown that reads rooms for a living. Luis, he said, and it sounded like something more than a question. Malik, I said, and it felt like I was standing in front of an answer. He saw the old man before he really looked at me. "Sir, we've got a charging station upstairs and a chair. We'll walk slow," he said, already positioning the suitcase oxygen like a dance partner. I stepped back because competence is seductive and rude to interrupt. The mother with the sleeping kid asked if it was okay to carry him across the gap. "You're doing great," Malik told her, and the words did something to my ribcage I haven't properly named. We ferried people up into a building that had never wanted to be a patient's room and became one anyway. The evening was hot, the kind of hot that makes strangers edit their arguments down to the essential. Somebody brought a cooler from a bodega, the bottles clacking like kindness. The station agent propped the emergency gate with a wedge of cardboard and a bad idea. A sax busker took a breath and decided to play softly, the Bach he saves for the hours when the city pretends not to be listening. The second rehook is here. I feel it even if I'm not calling it that. I thought the emergency was wires and rail, but the night started writing in breath and names, and it was my turn to read. When I finally stood still long enough to notice, Malik was beside me under the big map that lies about time. He handed me a water I didn't realize I'd been holding out my hand for. "You okay?" he asked, and his version of the phrase had a weight that made mine answer itself. "I keep being," I said. He huffed a laugh like he knew the brand. "Me too," he said. "We've got 3 feeders sulking, 1 burned recloser, a substation that needs therapy. But nobody got hurt crossing the roadbed, which I'm going to make my religion for the week." "Old man with the concentrator?" I asked. "Found a chair with a view and a fan that squeaks like a mouse." He told me I remind him of his grandson and then asked for a Mets score. I lied and said we were winning. The platform had settled into that post-scare bustle that cities do. Smaller voices, the soft scrape of work beginning again. I checked my cab, logged the stop, kicked the panel gently in the way mechanics hate and drivers swear works. The console blinked a little. The train pretended to consider cooperating. "Can I ask, how do you know my name? I thought MTA and Con Ed keep their databases like jealous lovers." He pointed at the roster clipped to the dispatch board. "Your badge number plus the dispatch, plus you said it when you first called before control went." Interpretive. Besides, the radio makes everyone sound like a cousin, but you say third with a queen's vowel, and that narrows it down. The power came back in shivers. First, the station lights did their carnival trick. Then, the trackside signals found their red and yellow. Then, the tunnel made its animal hum again. "We're going to try you south as far as 96th, Control said, as if he were asking me to slow dance. "Walkers first," Malik said, reading a list on his phone like a doctor checks vitals. 2 mothers with strollers who need the elevator that hates us, and a guy with an ankle that stopped being his friend around 135th. He caught my eye. "And if you can spare 5 minutes after you're clear, I'd kill for fresh air that isn't made entirely of electricity and apologies." "Breaks at 3 a.m., I said, stupidly pleased at the way the sentence folded his time into mine. I know a bodega that makes egg and cheese like it's an apology and a promise. Down the line, the night kept throwing little tests, a slow signal that refused to leave red, a kid who insisted he knew how to handle the gap until the gap argued. I ran the route at a pace that would have made my old instructor shrug and say, "Good, if nobody notices you, you did it right." Each platform looked like a family reunion where half the cousins are on their phones and the other half are learning to be kind. Twice I cut power because a bag edged too close to the line. Once I took a photo of a raccoon wearing the type of confidence only raccoons and hedge fund managers own. By 3:07, I was back at 96th, parked in a pocket that still believed in electricity. I looked up to see Malik waiting by the lamppost, the vest off now, just the Mets tee and a neck that held tired like a compliment. He held 2 paper cups, one extended toward me the way people offer you forgiveness when you didn't ask for it. "Tea," he said. "I'm a tea person. Don't leave me." We sat on the platform bench where the paint always flakes into maps. The station was nearly empty. A rat considered us and decided we were decorative. "Where'd you learn the voice?" I asked. "What voice?" He blinked, worried he'd been loud. "The one that tells people to stop doing the brave thing and do the smart thing instead." "My mother," he said. "She taught 2nd grade in Jackson Heights for 30 years. She could make 12 8-year-olds line up with a sentence and a raised eyebrow. I reverse-engineered the eyebrow into a tone. "But you're Con Ed." "My father worked nights for them," he said. "I swore I'd do anything else. I did anything else. Then Sandy, and I watched linemen turn neighborhoods back on like they were forgiving them. I liked that kind of apology. I came home." He sipped his tea and made a face like he'd been betrayed by a herb. "I'm Malik, by the way. I forgot to do that politely." "Luis," I said, though he'd said it first. I told him about my first dead man switch, the old operator who'd handed me a stale donut and said, "The tunnel is a rumor, kid. People are the story." I told him about my father's hands, who taught me that grief is just love with nowhere to go and that you tie it to rails and it keeps trains straight. Somewhere around the sentence where I admitted I sleep better on trains than in my bed, the radio coughed back to life. "Feeder restored on your section. Proceed to Times Square on caution. Repeat, on caution. Expect slow orders. Back to it?" Malik said. He stood, and in that second we were a new kind of pair, two men with jobs that become verbs during heat advisories. "But the part nobody will see on the CCTV is this," I said without saying it. He leaned in and pressed his forehead to mine for one soft, brief second, PG-13, tentative, undeniable, like he was checking that my skull was still where I had left it, like we had invented a prayer. A camera up under the tiles pivoted with all the curiosity of a cat. We stepped apart the way professionals do when they still want to be good at their jobs. I boarded my cab. He laced his fingers through the handle of his extension cord coil like he was marrying it. "Be safe, Luis." "You too," I said, which is city, for I want more sentences with your name in them. South into the brightening, the city tried her lights like jewelry, one wrist, then the other. Platforms went from the gray shades of memory to the yellows of presence. A group of tourists clapped for a local's freestyle. Offbeat, on heart. A nurse in Crocs fell asleep sitting up, her head finding the shoulder of a stranger who didn't move because he understood the fragile treaty. At Times Square, my relief was a kid who makes me feel both old and vindicated. "Heard you had a blackout," he said like he'd missed a party. "Anything spicy?" "Just electricity learning manners," I said. I left the cab cleaner than I found it, the way superstition and courtesy co-parent. I clocked out into a morning that had decided to be humid. The street was already bargaining. I texted a number that had not been given but had somehow appeared in my messages sometime between the concentrator and the tea. "Breakfast still on. I know you said tea, but a good egg and cheese converts." "Always," he wrote. "Because I am." I didn't know what that meant exactly, but I knew the brand, and my chest liked it. We ate on a milk crate outside a deli that has never had a name and never will, the kind of place that solves things with bread. He told me about feeder maps that look like Subway spaghetti, about the way you walk into a dark basement and talk like light has feelings and you don't want to hurt them. He told me how he calls old ladies Miss until they tell him their names, and then he invokes those names like spells. I told him about the time I took a kid to see the conductor's window because his mother said he needed to believe trains had people in them. I told him how 1,000 tons can feel like a paper boat if you think you're the only one steering. We didn't pick a schedule. We made the kind of rule people make when they refuse to jinx things. When Con Ed says non-essential load shed, he texts here. When Transit says expect delays due to power issues, I text me too. He keeps a spare phone battery in his vest because he knows I'll give mine away. I keep a Sharpie in my pocket for labeling coolers and oxygen and feelings. Weeks rolled like express trains that occasionally sit like locals. The city kept offering us practice, a transformer protest that sounded like a dragon, a stuck elevator with a woman whose laugh made 10 strangers competent, a summer storm that dared Brooklyn to remember it was an island. Malik's voice over the radio became both a situation and a solution. "Luis, do not accept the cleared signal until you've seen green with your own eyes." "Luis, we're keeping 70-second cold. Let them hate us and arrive alive. Luis, are you okay?" I keep being. Me too. We invented the inch between two foreheads under 1,000 different awnings. The cameras must have a gallery by now. One night in September, when the tourists had thinned and locals were practicing scarves, we found ourselves back at 125th without trying. An R-142 rolled in on squeaky trucks, a pigeon walked with superior politics, and an old man looked at us like he was giving us a project. "You boys together?" he asked, either because he had a gift for reading faces or because we were not very good at pretending the inch wasn't a sentence. "Working together," I said. "Living together," Malik added, just enough louder that I had to choose a reaction. I chose to look at him like he'd given me a map. The old man nodded like he had introduced his wife to his mother 60 years ago and understood math. After midnight, a busker with a cracked sax switched from Bach to "Isn't She Lovely?" which is unfair and always works. We stood under the big map again. "You know the plant in my cab?" I said. "It's still alive." "You keep your promises," he said. He did that thing where he tries to be casual with truth. "You keep 100 strangers alive, then go home and keep a plant alive." "Of course you do. You okay?" I asked him, meaning all the different ways a person can fail at rest. He looked at the floor, then at me. "I keep being," he said, "and sometimes I keep choosing." He leaned in, close enough that the tunnel's animal breath became ours. He didn't kiss me because we like our jobs and we like to keep them. He pressed his forehead to mine. 1 beat, 2, honest and small and enough. The camera turned its curious circle and filed it under electricity. Back above ground, the city tried another day. The plant in my cab leaned toward a light it can't see but insists is there. I keep one hand on something that doesn't move, a brake handle, a promise, a jawline when we laugh. When the radio crackles and the lights die and someone says my name like it's a handle, I answer. And when I'm the one with the voice, I say, "Hold, breathe, I'm at Lenox with ice," and I mean, I'm here. He says, "Me too, New York," impatient and tender and better at forgiveness than rumor says, keeps letting us try again.